Okay, so you just got hold of a brand new bust or a larger scale model, and you want to paint the skin tones and the face as realistically as you can, without it starting to look like a zombie or something completely weird. But you have no idea where to start. Well, I've been doing some digging for you, and I've been looking at some of the best painters around. I've also been looking at portrait painters, I've been looking at photography, and looking at a whole range of stuff, and looking at how they create those super realistic effects. And out of all this research, I've condensed it down to 4 key points. Now the joy of these is that you one builds on the next. So start from the beginning and work your way through. But also what is really cool with these 4 points is that is the basic structure, and you can then make it as simple or as complicated as you like. Okay, so rather than talk about the theory too much, let's work on this piece together and we'll follow it through, and I'll explain everything as I go. So if you want to follow this project along as we go, then you'll find a full and detailed resource list down in the description. So this model is a 1/10 World War II British Airborne with PIAT. A PIAT is an anti-tank weapon which this model's got slung over his shoulder. Now this model was really simple to prep and put together, so I'm not going to go into it in too much detail, but if you're not sure about this phase, I've gone into it in a lot more detail in this video right here. But assuming you're happy with that phase, I've built it into basically 3 sub-assemblies. So I've got the head, the body and the arm, and the third one is going to be the PIAT, which I'll assemble and add in at a later date. Now the first tip, the first building block, is the story. Now this is the foundation which everything else is built off. So it pays to kind of get it straight in your head what you're trying to achieve. So the bust we're working on for this project is a World War II sergeant from the British Parachute Regiment. Now in this one, the posture is quite relaxed and chilled out. It's not an action pose, so therefore the story is going to reflect that. So the very simple story that I'm going to try and tell in this model is that of a tired and weary but yet alert para sergeant who is getting ready for his next patrol. And it's on a cloudy day, and it's like early autumn. Now this may sound a little bit strange, but bear with me. It'll all make sense in a minute. Now the second tip, the second building brick, is going to be lighting. Now it pays to get this squared away in your head before you even put paint on the model. In other words, you can use the light to help tell the story. Now studying colour and light and how it interacts is really cool. And you can make it as simple or as complex as you like. Now for this one, we're going to keep it fairly simple, and you'll remember that it's going to be on a cloudy day in early autumn. Now this means that you can look at quite a soft light, and that's probably the easiest and most forgiving one to try and get your head around and to start on. So for example, this is me standing in my garden earlier, and it's quite a cloudy day. Now you notice that there's no harsh shadows, and the light is generally quite even. Okay, so having figured that bit out, let's start getting some paint down. Now ideally I wanted to prime this in white, but I didn't have any, so I primed it in a black Mecha primer from Vallejo, and then oversprayed that with a white ink. Now this will give you an idea of some of the detail and the shadows, which is quite handy. Now using an airbrush, I sprayed it from below using a sea blue from Tamiya, and then from the top down I then did a layer of deck tan. Now what this does, it adds some blue into those shadows and the light tan colour as the very base for those skin tones. If you are going to do this, make sure you do it that way around. You put the blue on first and then the deck tan over the top. Because if you do it the other way around, you put the deck tan on first and then spray from below with the dark blue, you have too much shadow in there and you're making life harder than it needs to be. So I now want to put a very basic light skin colour on. So I'm going to primarily mix this colour out of a reddy brown and some yellow and a little dash of blue to make it a little bit cooler, and then use the white to bring it down to the colour I want. Now first of all, I want quite a dark skin tone. Then once I've got the colour I want, I'm then going to dilute that down a little bit with some airbrush thinners to get it to the consistency that will go through the airbrush nicely. You can do it with a brush, it's just a lot easier and quicker, and you'll get a smoother transition with the airbrush. If you are going to do it by brush, I'd recommend that you do it by glazing, so you really water it down and then slowly, ever so slowly, layer upon layer, build up the colour. So I'm going to take this slightly darker skin colour and spray it from below. And then once I'm happy with that, I then add some more white into the mix to lighten it down a bit, and then spray from above. This will give a really nice foundation to build off, but it'll also start to build in those shadows and highlights. So the first step of this is to sketch out the lighting. But to make life a little bit easier for later on, I'm going to mix up the paint we're going to need for this project. Now for the rest of the skin areas on this model, I'm going to use a mix of these 6 colours. These are all oil paints, and these are all from Winsor & Newton, and I'll put exact links to the exact colours and stuff down in the description. Now every skin tone starts with a mix of red and yellow, adding a little bit of blue to add more of a cold tone, and then using these 6 to create a gradient from the darkest shadow through to the brightest highlight. Because these are oils, they will smudge and they'll blend beautifully. Now as far as paint brushes go, I'm going to use 2 brushes for starters. Now the first step is going to be fairly crude. I don't need to worry too much about the detail. So I'm going to save my finest tip brushes for later on. But for now, I'm going to use a standard synthetic brush. As long as it's got a fairly fine point, that'll do for now. So this one places the paint where I want it to be. But I want to blend it out. Now I've had these dry brushes, these are from Rosemary & Co. I've had them for a little while now, and I've been waiting to try them out. I think this small one will be perfect for this job. Therefore the synthetic round brush is going to place the paint exactly where I want it to be, and then I'm going to use a dry brush with a little bit of enamel thinners on the end. Not too much, just a little bit, and use that to smudge and feather out that oil paint. Now the first part of this is sketching out the light. So the darkest colour, I'm going to add the shadows in. So this is going to be in the nostrils and under the eyebrows and inside the ears. I'm trying to build up a monochrome sketch of the light. There's no real fixed rules on how to do this. It's all about contrast and lighting and what you like. Okay, so we've now gone through story, we've gone through the lighting, and we've now created our lighting sketch on the bust. The next stage, the next building block, is going to be skin tones. Now this is the bit where everyone starts freaking out and starts worrying about making it look like a zombie or whatever else. But there's just 4 things you need to think about here. Now the first is zones, then temperature, contrast, and then painting what you actually see, not what you think. Now what I mean by this is that even if you're doing a fantasy figure, get hold of some reference photos, or start really looking at things on TV, and you'll start to notice things. You'll start to notice the colour changes across the face. Just be careful you don't start staring at people in real life, because that might not go down too well. So when you're painting faces, zones is a technique used by portrait painters to help get realistic skin tones. Now these zones can be extremely subtle, and you tend to see them most prominently in fairer complexions, but it can be an amazing tool on where to put the colour to give you a much more realistic result. And it's all based around the underlying anatomy. So for example, across the forehead there tends to be a lot less blood vessels and a lot less musculature. So therefore you tend to have a slightly more golden hue to the skin across the forehead. So the next zone goes from kind of the eyes down to the tip of the nose. And in this area there's a lot more muscle, there's a lot more capillaries, a lot more blood vessels. So therefore it tends to be more redder in nature. Now the third zone goes from the base of the nose down to the angle of the jaw. And this tends to be more a grey, blue, greeny sort of hue. Now this is where it's really interesting, because in a clean shaven man it tends to be more of a greyer hue. In women and children, often realist painters will add more of a green hue to this zone here. And this can often be accentuated and exaggerated to really set off and contrast the red of the lips. But every rule is made to be broken. Now this is where your story comes in. So this rule applies for somebody at rest. But if they have been exercising hard or really hot, then the rest of the face tends to get a lot paler. But this zone here, the middle zone, tends to extend up across the nose and down diagonally across to the angle of the jaw. And this also leads into the temperature. And the story will also dictate the temperature of the colours that you're using. So for example, if the environment is really cold weather, for example, or they're in a cave or anything like that, then you'll add more blue to the colours to make them colder. However, on the flip side, if they are either working really hard, they're exercising, or they're in a hot environment, you can use warmer colours as well. And that temperature also feeds itself back into that lighting that we looked at earlier on. So for example, a winter light or a warm summer's evening light will be very, very different. Now with any smaller scale model, you're going to be working on the contrast, so it's easier to read. So therefore I need to keep reminding myself to make sure that the colours I'm putting in, I'm also building that contrast in as well at the same time. And this is where that final point about painting in reality can really, really help. So if you've got reference pictures or reference photos, you can essentially copy exactly what you see of a similar sort of skin complexion in the environment that you're trying to portray. Then if you kind of copy that, you'll be able to recreate that realistic look, and it will read correctly to the eye, and your brain will be able to understand it, and it will make a lot more sense. Now me, as a rookie painter, I'm still learning this, and I don't know about you, let me know down in the comments, but I find that I have to really fight the urge to paint what I think should be there rather than what I can see in my reference photo. Do you have this problem? Let me know down below. So before we go on to that final tip, let's have a look at what we've got so far. So this model here, but I did this first one purely in acrylics. The finish is very matte, it's a lot rougher, and I'm not happy with the skin tones. Now, having learned what we've been going through just now, looking at this one here, yeah, it's still more I can do on it, still more I can learn and progress and get better at it. But I think it's definite improvement from the last one. What do you think? Yes, I still need a lot more practice, and there's things I can do to improve it, but I also need to remind myself, especially at this stage of the game, it's about improvement, not perfection. So on to the very final piece of the puzzle. Now this is what the very best painters tend to put in. And they put in texture. They put in blemishes and specular highlights and all sorts of really, really fine details that really take it to the next level and make it look amazingly, almost photorealistic. Now me, I recognise I'm not quite there yet. However, what you can start to do is put texture into the fabrics, into the uniforms and the equipment. So let's have a look at that next.